I'm gonna have to rack my brain a little bit because I moved to the Netherlands roughly 10 years ago. I was an actual child and I moved here because of my dad's job. For added context, I am 27 even though I look 14. So in today's video, I'm doing something that's been a lot more requested as of late. My name is Mia. I'm so happy that you're here. I create content centered around my lifestyle as a South African abroad in the Netherlands, primarily also focusing on fashion and living consciously. Some of the details are a little bit murky because so much has happened in the span of a decade. As a child, I always knew that I would move abroad eventually, and this is because my dad traveled for months at a time. Because of his job, my family and I explored Thailand. We were able to go to Singapore and Hong Kong before we started moving on to the European countries, specifically Western Europe. In 2012, we visited the Netherlands for the very first time, but I didn't actually consider that we might even be moving here, or that maybe they were kind of sussing it out to see if this was a place I'd want to live in. In 2013, my house in Cape Town just became a labyrinth of boxes. We packed up our entire lives and we just moved abroad to the Netherlands. Around about that time, things were really crazy. When you're moving, there's so much to do. It's almost like there's an adrenaline rush because you have a whole to-do list, whether that's packing boxes, finalizing some things that you need to get done, you know, attending events, planning a farewell. There's so much that you're doing that it's kind of like you're not even really focusing on what you're doing and how you're getting through it until you have a moment of rest. We took a flight from Cape Town to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam, and that was a 12-hour flight. Typically that's how long the flights are in general, unless you have a bit of a layover. Normally when I fly from South Africa to the Netherlands, I do take a direct flight, or I stop in Zurich in Switzerland and then I make my way to Amsterdam. I'll never forget when we arrived in the Netherlands. It was literally the day before Christmas. It was Christmas Eve and I was so angry. I was so angry. And if you feel any sort of negative emotions towards moving, maybe because it's not necessarily something that you might want or fully understand, I feel like that is completely justified. So yeah, I was pretty angry because I didn't want to move, but it ended up being one of the best things that had actually ever happened to me in my entire life. Of course, that's something I only would realize much later. So when we arrived in the Netherlands, it was winter because it's December and the seasons are reversed, as you might know. In South Africa, we had just left the heat of the summertime, and the one thing you need to understand about South African summer is that it's not a season, it's a lifestyle, okay? It's a lifestyle. In the Netherlands, when we landed, everything was super gloomy. It was so cold and it had just started snowing, but not proper snow just yet, just kind of like that slush, like that grayish, muddy sort of slush. I remember just like looking around and thinking, oh my god, we left sunny South Africa for this. From the airport, we drove with an Uber, I think, or I don't know, I think we just called a cab or something. I don't remember taking public transport back at that point, and we got to our house in Rotterdam. So the house that we stayed in was in an area called Hilligersberg, and that was perfect. A lot of my friends lived in the same area and it was actually pretty international at that point in time. Shortly after we had moved in, my family started to get like, you know, things in order. My sister and I were enrolled into two different schools. So she went to a local Dutch school. She was quite young at the time, and I was enrolled into an international school. I had to restart grade 10. Like I basically had to redo 6 months of grade 10 because the school years are different. So in South Africa, the school year runs straight through. It goes from January to December and you have a couple of holidays in between. In the Netherlands, the school year starts in August or September sometimes, and it goes through to June or July. Right after that, you have summer break and you move on to the next school year. As I mentioned earlier, my sister went to a Dutch school, and this is largely because international schools are a lot more expensive. Basically, I followed kind of like an American grading system. We had pretty much everything that you would consider them having in America, aside from the other school buses. It was a really interesting time because there was a lot to adjust to. For a start, I went to school and I didn't have a uniform. In South Africa, you always wear a uniform to school unless you have like a Civies Day, which is basically like, you know, Civies, it stands for civilian, so you wear what it is that you would normally wear if you weren't attending school. I was a teenager who had no sense of style, no idea of what it was like to, you know, dress up or like what casual meant in a new country, and I remember that was kind of anxiety inducing because not only was I starting a new school in a new country, but I was halfway through the school year. Everyone already knew each other. A lot of people had already kind of formed groups and made their friends, and here I was, my first day of school, not even sure what to wear. My sister joined me the year after that, and that was so nice because I could actually see her. So she's 7 years younger than I am, which meant that we didn't have our lunch breaks roughly at the same time, or like I didn't get to see her that often. But the school was so small that it was kind of hard to miss each other. Like I think in the entire school we had about 210 students. In my class alone, we only had 10 kids. The one thing that I really loved about attending an international school was actually you know, experiencing different cultures, getting to know people from different countries. I feel like that really helped me with my communication skills, learning how to respect people from different backgrounds and like what it is that they consider respect to look like, and also just getting to know so much more about different countries. Although the school was an American school system, there were quite a lot of Dutch people as well. We also had so many people who were from Canada, and I think there were like 1 or 2 other South Africans. From what I remember the most, like I loved hearing all of the different accents. My maths teacher was Spanish, my biology teacher was American. I don't know where my psychology teacher was from now that I think about it. Either way, he's an Austrian citizen now, so that's pretty cool. I also didn't follow a conventional school system, so in South Africa everyone kind of follows the same system. Like you might have like the Cambridge system, or you might do Waldorf or something like that, but in the Netherlands it was either like, you know, the Dutch school system, or you had Cambridge, or you did the IB, which stands for International Baccalaureate. The system is essentially designed to make you a well-rounded being. You choose 6 subjects, 3 at higher level and 3 at lower level. My higher level subjects were English, psychology, and I think I did Dutch higher level, and then my lower level subjects were maths, environmental sciences and film studies. So on top of your studies, you were also required to participate in what is known as CAS. CAS stands for creativity, action and service. So creativity would be me engaging in a school play, like help out with the art program or something of the sort. I would have to do something that would fulfill that requirement. Then with action, that would basically be sport. I joined the track team. That was not a fun time, but we pushed through. And on top of that, I also did volunteer work, and we actually got to go to Costa Rica for that, which was insanely cool because I did 2 weeks of volunteer work in Costa Rica. So aside from actually participating in these CAS activities, you also have to do a CAS project, and it's essentially a project that you work on that falls under creativity, action or service. I went with creativity because I know my strengths. I chose to do my blog. I don't even know how I managed to get away with that. So many people just did like really complex projects. I was like, I don't have time for this. Like I'm literally just trying to study and get through the school year. In addition to that, you also have what is known as your extended essay. This is basically like a mini thesis. So if you are moving abroad and you are thinking about doing the IB system, know that it is very rigorous, it is very intensive, it is a lot to do. Like if you are studying and you have all of these other things to keep up with, on top of maybe even having a side job, or like a part-time job, I should say, a side job. The IB program is not for everybody. It is very rigorous. Their main goal is to turn you into what they think is a well-rounded individual. But honestly, I feel like it really prepared me so well for university. I should also mention that IB is a 2-year course, so you typically start it in your 11th year of school and then you finish it in your 12th year, so basically when you're a senior and when you're about to graduate high school. One of the other things that I think was probably the biggest difference for me was that we had prom, and I never actually experienced a matric dance. I never got the experience of, you know, really dressing up, the cars waiting outside of the school, like the parents and the friends taking pictures and stuff like that. We had prom, but like I mentioned before, my school, specifically my class, was so tiny that we had prom every single year and the whole school was invited. There was only a spotlight on like the people that were graduating, so it would be like a senior prom, but not really because the rest of the school starting from grade 9 would be there. So by the time that I graduated high school, I had already attended prom like for 3 years in a row, and honestly it didn't feel like a special occasion, it just felt like a canon event. That was roughly in 2016, and that's pretty much when shit hit the fan. My aunt passed away. Yeah, we're getting serious for a second. My aunt passed away and I wasn't able to go to her funeral because I had to write my IB exams. Mentally that was obviously not like, you know, good. Like it was shit. It was shit. My parents also got divorced that same year, and I was really stressed because I wasn't sure what to do, and I had just started to build a life for myself in the Netherlands. The only thing that I knew was if I left Europe now, I wouldn't be able to come back. I have no ties to the European Union. I do not have European family members that I could suddenly call on for like ancestral visas or whatever the heck. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna place a bet on myself and I'm gonna win. I was 17 at the time and I had no clue what I was doing. But after I had graduated high school, I started applying to universities and I got accepted at Tilburg University. The week before the orientation program was so rushed. I did not have any place to stay because that first week of the orientation program, I was bouncing around from couch to couch. I was staying at some friends' houses. My mom was back in Rotterdam packing up the house, sorting her and my sister out. My dad was on a work trip. Like it was basically everyone for themselves and God for us all. My mom was helping me move some of my stuff when I eventually got an apartment. Like luckily my parents were able to still come and sort of sort me out. Like right before I officially started orientation week, we did some viewings of apartment in Tilburg. Besties, I was living in the ratatata. Can't even get over that. I ended up rooming with a girl that I met on Facebook, which in itself was already a gamble. The day that I moved into my university apartment, because keep in mind, they don't have dorms here, okay? Like, you have to get an apartment or a room. So I was a little bougie and I got an apartment with someone else. The day that we moved in, she was still in Kosovo, which is where she's from, and we had paid rent, the deposit, everything. Okay, not we, my parents did. Let's just have that little disclaimer out there. I'm spoiled. And the day that we moved into that apartment, this guy that was living there was literally rolling joints like on the dining room table. The entire place smelled like weed. It was so intense. The landlord was like trying to kick him out so that we could start moving our stuff in. So on top of moving herself back to another country, my mother, honestly, bless the woman, like was really, you know, helping me move into this apartment, coming with me to like buy some things, packing some of my things. It was absolutely crazy. 2 weeks later, my ex-roommate, I love her, moved in. We became really good friends, and it was just a crazy mix of both of us adjusting to university, making friends, kind of finding our feet, living alone in a new country, essentially. When I started my first week of university, my entire family was in a different country. I was living by myself in the Netherlands at that time. I think then I was probably 18 or 19 years old. That was a lot. Like, when I think about it, it was actually a lot. Obviously, because I had lived in the Netherlands before, I did have an advantage of knowing how things work. Specifically, the transport system. I already had my bank account set up. I already had a bike, you know, these kinds of things. So because I could cycle, because I had all of that knowledge of how the Netherlands sort of operated, I was able to adjust a little bit easier, and I was also able to help people who were just coming into the country adjust to that way of living, or I guess like the Dutch way of living. The university that I attended was called Tilburg University. I wish I was able to make more friends, but the one thing about Dutch people and Dutch culture that I think is very important to know is that people are friendly, but they're not necessarily your friend. And this is largely because Dutch people have friends or like friend groups from when they were really, really young, and they carry that all the way into adulthood. So internationals typically tend to stick together, and Dutch people tend to stick together. Obviously, like most of the classes that I took were in English. So if there's a Dutch person in your class, they know how to speak English, and that's a really good way to communicate. But one thing I always advise any international person to do is to learn at least the basic key phrases of the Dutch language. Dutch people appreciate it so much. You also don't look like one of those people that just expects everyone to cater to you in your language, which is honestly like the worst, because you can't want all the advantages of living in the country but not make any effort to actually integrate. The Tilburg University campus was absolutely gorgeous. However, I won't go too much into that because I already have a whole video up on that, like I mentioned, specifically talking about campus culture, housing, tuition fees, sororities and fraternities, you know, all that good stuff. I did my bachelor and my master at Tilburg University, both specializing in media and culture, and honestly it was absolutely insane because I graduated during the pandemic. I wasn't really able to go home for quite some time because I'm allergic to vaccinations, so I wasn't able to fly out or really travel anywhere for about 2 years. During that time, I would say I felt pretty lonely because obviously, aside from the pandemic, before that, like university years were kind of like a roller coaster of feeling low because I was missing home quite frequently and I didn't really have that many friends, largely because a lot of my friends are pretty much all over the globe. Like, my high school friends that I've remained in contact with are all pretty much in the States. Like, most of them are located in New York or in Boston. I have made some internet friends that I absolutely love and adore, but they're also in different countries like Slovenia or France. I've lived here for 10 years and I only have 2 Dutch friends, which I think says a lot. It's not like people don't want to meet up, they do, but the social circles are very tight-knit. There's cliques for sure, and the cliques are basically based on nationality. Like I said before, it's pretty much the Dutch people and the internationals, and sometimes there is overlap, but it is very, very rare. I think it's a lot easier to find yourself in a Dutch social circle if you have a Dutch partner, or if you have a Dutch friend and they've kind of like adopted you into their friend group, but the chances of that one happening I think are quite slim. I graduated during the pandemic, which obviously was not the best time because it was literally a Zoom call after the apartment with the girl from Kosovo. I ended up moving into a new accommodation where I lived for the majority of my time in Tilburg. However, it wasn't the best living situation because of the roommate that I had, and after she left I only continued to stay there for a short amount of time. But even though the situation in the dorm rooms were improving, you know, people were moving out, life is moving fast, and I just decided I needed to move on, so I moved out. I ended up living in Utrecht for about 6 months. This was also like roughly after COVID, or like right before COVID officially ended, before deciding to move back to Rotterdam. That was a beautiful year in Rotterdam, but very quickly, like, my life started going haywire. It was overwhelming. I was feeling so confused, quite lost, very lonely at that point. A lot of my friends had started to move back to their home countries. Now at this point, I had moved about 4 times in the Netherlands. I also thought I was going to move to Germany at one point. If that didn't work out, you know what, I'm done, I give up. back to South Africa we go. And we did. We spent a whole year in South Africa, and babe, we made the best out of it. It was humbling going home. It was crazy going home. There was so much to adjust to. One of the things was definitely like the safety factor. In the Netherlands, I feel safe all the time. Unless there's a man, I feel safe. That's the thing about South Africa though. You don't always feel safe. You have to be hyper vigilant. Whether you're sitting in a cafe and your bag's just on the floor, you have to keep an eye on it. In the Netherlands, I can leave my bag next to me on the train and nothing's really going to happen. Like 9 times out of 10, nothing will happen to it. I can sleep with my windows open. A lot of people sleep with their doors unlocked. The chances of something happening are so slim. Obviously, you have to be alert, but in South Africa, you have to be hyper vigilant like 24/7, 7 days a week. So I did not miss that. The other thing that I would say would be like the electricity issue, the load shedding, especially if I was visiting different family members where sometimes they wouldn't have electricity for up to 8 hours a day. Now, this isn't to say like I'm shitting on South Africa. South Africa is my home country. It always has been, it always will be. But there's definitely reasons as to why you might be watching this video. There are definitely reasons as to why you might consider leaving. Whether it's the political system, whether it's gender-based violence, whether you're just looking for a change, you know, it doesn't always have to be a negative thing. In my case, the reason why I moved was because of my dad's job opportunity. So that's another thing, right? South Africa has very high unemployment rates. You have people sitting at home with master's degrees, which is absolutely crazy. And while I initially moved abroad because of my dad's job, I chose to stay for my own future, and I wanted to see what could come from it if I continued to stay here instead of going home. So when I did decide to go home, I really cherished it because I realized how much I missed out on in terms of birthdays, weddings, funerals. And I think I forgot that as I was growing up, the people around me were getting older too. Like my grandparents, seeing them for the first time, they were turning grey, which is crazy. Like my cousins who were this short are now this tall. It's just, you know, so eye-opening to be able to see and to experience. I also made incredible friends back in South Africa. That's another thing that's kind of like a pro and a con. When you are an expat, you have friends all over the world, but you don't always have a community where you are. Point blank period. I miss my friend groups in South Africa because that's the other difference. I have friend groups, multiple of them. In the Netherlands, I have friends, and obviously I love them and I can spend time with them, but I don't have a group of girls that I would hang out with. That's 110% something that I miss from home. However, something that is super cool about the friends that I do have is that if I am traveling, I know that there's someone that I can stay with. For example, I was on a trip in 2018 and we went to Sweden and I met up with one of my friends there. Another time I was in Paris and I stayed with one of my friends who lives there now. If I go to New York City, I know I can stay with my friend Lauren. Like, I think that is one of the coolest things about being an expat, but it doesn't take away from the fact that sometimes you do feel lonely, sometimes you do miss community, and it really does take a village. Like, your connections with people are largely online. Long distance becomes the norm, and it's really up to you to put the effort in to continue that friendship and to kind of like, you know, have an understanding with people who might not be used to that way of living. If I didn't stay in touch with you, it's not because I've forgotten about you or because my life in Europe is so much better. It's literally just because things are long distance and it's a two-way street. One of the other things I would say I love most about living in the Netherlands are the seasonal activities. Obviously, we have a lot of things that we do in South Africa across the seasons, but if you've ever watched American movies when you were a kid and you saw, like, you know, how they would go trick-or-treating or carve pumpkins, or during Christmas time they would build snowmen, or, you know, they would go sledding and stuff like that. Like, as a child, these were things that I would see on TV. Now, as an adult, these are things that I'm actually able to experience. Everything from carving pumpkins to having like seasonal little drinks to being able to ski and sled and go to places like that is such an insane thought and feeling. Naturally, there's places that offer this in South Africa as well. That's not what I'm saying, but it's just a different way of experiencing it. So in 2 months time, it's going to be autumn here in the Netherlands, and that's my favorite season. One of the things that I'm most looking forward to is going apple picking, going pumpkin picking, carving pumpkins, celebrating Halloween parties. You know, it's just like a kind of general atmosphere that I love looking forward to every year. But if you're worried about any specific cultural shocks coming to the Netherlands, or if you're curious about any, I wouldn't really say that there's too much. Maybe one of the biggest ones for me is that Dutch people don't have warm lunches. Maybe that's normal to other people, but in South Africa, people normally have a warm lunch unless they're opting for something cold. In the Netherlands, everything revolves around bread or deep fried stuff. The Dutch aren't exactly known for their cuisine, so if you're coming from South Africa and expecting some bomb food, you might be a little bit disappointed. However, the Dutch are known for many other things, including their architecture, which is always really cool to explore. The museum culture is absolutely incredible as well, and you can also get what is known as a museum card, and then you can explore the Netherlands and like have access to pretty much all of the museums in the country. However, I would argue that Cape Town's art scene is like unbeatable. It's absolutely incredible how creative people are. The difference is that there are a lot more resources in place for people to become entrepreneurs in the Netherlands compared to South Africa, where I feel like people kind of just have to figure out their own way. But South Africans are absolutely creative, innovative, and always coming up with something new. And that's also something that I miss from home, like being able to see some of the street art, being able to see like those sand sculptures at the beach. Like I miss that so much, because also in the Netherlands, like we don't really have beaches. I mean, there are a few, but it's nothing compared to the beaches of Cape Town. Obviously, there are many canals in the Netherlands though, so that's something I really love. In the summer and in the springtime, you can take a canal out. What? You can take a boat out on the canal and you can explore, and it's so incredible to do. Now, naturally, being able to move abroad, experience a different culture, learn a new language, have friends from all over the globe is a huge privilege, and I think it should be addressed as such. Like, I am so grateful for all of the experiences that I've had, but that doesn't mean that they've always been good ones. It doesn't necessarily mean that they've always been bad ones either, but one thing is true, in that there has been a consistent learning curve. I feel like I have grown so much as an individual. I've learned so much about myself, being able to basically stay in a country by myself. So it has its sacrifices, it has its ups and downs, and I think you would be very naive to kind of romanticize moving. I'm not saying that there aren't good parts about moving. I'm not saying that you can't romanticize a fresh start, or, you know, be the main character in a new city or country. Moving requires so much sacrifice. There's a fresh start. You can do anything with this future that you've been given. And the thing with that is, it's only going to hit you when you're actually like in the country, because then everything changes. Suddenly it's a new way of going grocery shop. If you go to the supermarket, you have to navigate the aisles, and on holiday that can be fun, but if you're moving somewhere, it can be intimidating. In the Netherlands, you have to weigh your own fruits and vegetables. You have to bag your groceries by yourself. It's small things like that that you have to learn how to do, and it's even a little bit more challenging when there is a language barrier. So for example, if you're weighing your fruits and vegetables, you know, you have to know what that is in the other language if they're on pictures. Then there's little luxuries in the Netherlands that I personally don't have, and that would be considered quite luxurious compared to how my life is in South Africa. So for example, in South Africa, it's very common to have a cleaner. In the Netherlands, that's quite a luxurious thing to have. Like, most people tidy their houses by themselves, you know, you don't really have that extra help. It's just you and whoever you're living with. Of course, there are people who do have that, but again, it's considered a luxury. Same with going to the hair salon multiple times a month. In South Africa, that was pretty common for me to do a couple of times a month, but in the Netherlands, it's very difficult. Firstly, because I have to find someone that knows how to manage my hair type. Secondly, it's pretty expensive. And third, a lot of the things that you would expect to be included are not included. Like, sometimes you have to, you know, pay separately for shampoo and conditioner, but here it's just like every little thing that you're doing, you're paying extra for, which obviously makes sense now that I'm more used to it, but it is a lot to adjust to if that's not something that you are previously used to. Something else that I found really interesting about moving abroad is that a lot of the things that you know or think you know are kind of questioned. For example, in the Netherlands, people are very liberal when it comes to sex and drugs. In other countries, topics like that might be very taboo. While drug culture and drug use is very common in South Africa, it's actually legal in the Netherlands, which changes the game completely for people who are visiting and for people who may not have previously had that access. So it's definitely a lot to consider from all angles. Perhaps the younger you are, the easier it is to adjust, because obviously when you're older, you know, like a lot of things are going to take a little bit more time to get used to. So it's all of these things that, you know, add to the challenges and the experience of living abroad, and kind of makes you, you know, like it tests your resilience basically. Personally for me, I've moved around quite a few times, and I come from a very small town in South Africa. It's called Robertson, and I wish some of the people that I grew up with in that street were able to experience some of the things that I have experienced or gotten to see. So that is also the other thing that comes with moving abroad. When I say that moving abroad or moving away from things that you know is a sacrifice, I don't even necessarily mean you just leaving your life behind. You're sacrificing time. Like, no expat has moved to another country and they were like, oh yeah, I want to go here because it's shitty. No, you're moving because you see a brighter future. You're moving because you know that there's experiences and opportunities that await you. And with the current political climate, especially in South Africa, I can see how so many people are leaving, why so many people are going. As a nation, we are very jolly, like we are so friendly, we are so vibey, and these are things that I miss. But there's also things that we realistically need to consider in terms of employment rates, safety, what they're doing about it. The thing about the Netherlands is it's not even perfect, and people love to romanticize Europe. South Africa, in my opinion, has so much more of what feeds my soul. But the quality of life that I have in the Netherlands, in terms of safety especially, is probably the #1 reason why I'm still abroad. The first 2 or 3 weeks that I went back to South Africa, I couldn't sleep. I already have insomnia, but this time it was anxiety induced. The thing is, South Africans, myself included, we are so desensitized to crime. On the radio, we are constantly hearing about murder. We're constantly hearing about children going missing, women getting raped, people getting killed by their partners. It's just become such a norm. So when I went home, I honestly felt so uneasy. I was thinking about how I had to double check that everything was locked, how when it starts getting dark, I want to be inside my house. I was thinking all of these things, and I compared it to my life in the Netherlands, which is not really something you should be doing because they're two very different countries, but I couldn't help it because I was living two very different experiences. I honestly feel like crime in South Africa has gotten so out of control, and that's one of the biggest things that makes me fear for, you know, my family members who are still there. It's one of the biggest factors as to why I haven't moved back. I also feel like when you take a step back, or like if you're able to travel somewhere else, or you know, if you move abroad and then you go back to South Africa, you see it from a different perspective. On another note, aside from the guilt, I'm obviously grateful to be able to be here. I'm grateful that I'm able to go back and see my family and surround myself with my people. Like the second that I step off that plane in Cape Town and I see the flight attendants and other South Africans smiling, laughing, no feeling compares to that. It doesn't matter how many times you move, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, nothing will compare to that feeling of being at home in South Africa. There are so many nuances within that because if you are an expat, you know, home becomes so many different places. I think of the culture, the food, how South Africans make jokes at everything. Like, we always say that it's a choice to be bored in South Africa. South Africa has personality. There's a lot to experience in the Netherlands, don't get me wrong, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't the case. But in a nutshell, there's nothing like home, and there never will be. I hope this video has given you a little bit more of an understanding of, you know, what it's like to live abroad. Obviously this is my experience, my perspective. And if you live abroad or you're in the Netherlands and you have a different perspective on things here, like, you're completely entitled to that. But I've enjoyed yapping with you guys, just kind of sharing a little bit more about me. South Africa will always be home. I miss it every single day. I miss rooibos tea, like authentic rooibos tea, guys. Like, here they mix it with like orange and vanilla and sometimes strawberry, and I'm like, no, I want the original stuff. I miss Stony. I miss the Oranje market. I miss proper knickknacks. Like, yo, I could go on for ages. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it a little bit informative. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow me on socials. I had a great time yapping, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you in future videos. Have a great day and see you in my next one.